Welcome to the Gospel Addict Podcast. I'm Greg Bryan.
And I'm Jim Reske.
We're gospel addicts because we believe the gospel of Jesus isn't just good news, it's the best news ever.
We're addicted to the gospel because it doesn't just start us out in the Christian life, it is the Christian life.
Join us as we look at the Bible through the lens of the gospel.
Thanks so much for listening.
So, what else? You said you had a laundry list.
Yeah, a couple more things.
Some small things.
Yeah, little things. The part about, I guess, towards the end, thinking about, you get to decrease. He must increase, I must decrease. I was thinking about how it's easy to overestimate our contribution to the kingdom. And how you could think about you have a critical role to play in the kingdom. God does use people, but God unfolds His plan the way He wants to unfold it. And I think that was one of the lessons that may have been one of the lessons for the laborers in the vineyard story for Peter, because Peter's like, what's in it for us? That we're like, I got lots of laborers. They're all important. The owner of vineyard says, I just need to get the work done. I don't need people quibbling about who's greater.
I love the way you articulated that and the way you explained the importance of the context of that parable, because we often pull parables out of their context.
That's right.
And so it's easy to misinterpret them.
Right.
But in the context, it makes perfect sense with the way you described it. That that he was responding to Peter. I thought that was great.
Yeah, and just and I left out. There's another thing I left out. Maybe it's good in the interest of time. The disciples who came, was the mother who came and said, "Can these two sit on your right and left hand in my kingdom?" The mother James and John, and Jesus says, "Can you drink the cup that I have?" "Oh, yes, we can." He said, "That's not mine to give." Anyway, arguing about who's the greatest in the kingdom. I think that's part of these chapters as well. And I left that. I couldn't cover everything, so I left that out.
Right.
But it fits right. It fits right in as well. It's like Jesus is like, look, you're all thinking about what's in it for you, and you can be great, and you're overestimating your contribution, right?
I think that's a fair thing. You could have just mentioned it even in passing.
Yeah.
Without like diving into the scripture. You could have just mentioned, so that went along with your, that went along with it. But I don't think so do you know why you missed that, or you just?
I think it's just because I just the interest of time, there's only so much to cover.
Right.
So I left out, when Jesus suffered the children of the transfigure, there's so many great things. You just can't do it. So I really want to get this theme of nothing and then only cover that. So anyway, but I'll tell you, there's a couple I did want to talk about, and I left this out. This is next on my laundry list. The whole idea of the rewards and the personal rewards. And I kind of took a stand on that. I do believe this, that I don't think like there's personal rewards. There's no variability in personal rewards. In other words, I had in my notes, but I didn't say it, and probably good because I ran out of time anyway. Trying to distinguish between personal rewards and people rewards. Now, I did that last time in the Galatians talk, right? There's people rewards, all the people your life touches, you do touch. But I think that also there's positional rewards. There's I don't know if anyone uses that personal people positional as some kind of framework. But you think about someone, Jesus says, well, you've been good with 3 cities and you'll be in charge of 5 cities or whatever it is, in my kingdom. So I think that in the kingdom to come, God's going to have some kind of hierarchy of authority, and he's going to put people in charge of that purely based on their gifts and abilities. And they're like, you're a really great administrator. I want you to do this. I want you to run this thing. And I think, and by the way, I think when you say that's my boss, I think that person is that should be my boss, because they are really great at running this thing, way better than I am. And so he'll put people in exactly the right role based on exactly what their gifts and talents. But I don't think of that as a reward. I think of that as like, well,
that's just being our best. That's like we will be. It's like being our best selves, being in the perfect job or
Yeah, perfectly suited, proportional to exactly your gifts and calling and what he wants to
because
get done.
like right now we live in a fallen world and we're
That's right.
fallen people, but
That's right.
when we go to heaven, everything will be our best selves. So that
That's right.
means we'll it makes sense that we would work in the field that we would be the most fruitful and productive.
Look, yes, I'll give you a great example. My parents came through war torn World War II from Eastern Europe, escaped through the Iron Curtain to the United States. My father didn't get the great education, but would have been a phenomenal engineer. You know, he built 3 houses. We have because he just passed away a couple of years ago. My mother just passed away, but now we have like all the plans and drawings. In a different world, different time, different circumstances, would have been an incredible engineer, right? So hopefully the next kingdom, he's drawing up plans for things, and God's using him
Yeah,
to the maximum of his gifts and talents. But I don't think
that's perfect. That's a great
yeah,
example.
but I'm not like a reward for good behavior. I think the
That's not a
reward thing.
reward. So
Oh,
people, here's the
right.
thing. We often think, well, like, so another engineer dies and your dad ends up being a higher engineer in the kingdom of God. Is that engineer going to be jealous? Like, hey, but I don't think we will be.
I don't
I
think
don't think
so.
we will be. I
I
think
don't think so.
everybody will be fulfilled because we won't have those like selfish, sinful thoughts of
Right.
like, jealousy or
Right.
envy or greed.
Right. Right. But the personal rewards thing that and a lot of commentators think about this is that verse about the bema seat of Christ and thinking that I am going to get personal rewards, all the ice cream I can eat. I mean, something to gratify my flesh, basically, personal rewards for all my righteous good behavior. Because I was a 6 and I moved to a 7 and finally became an 8 before I died. And I get a something to indulge myself with. That's why I always use that silly example: red Corvettes in heaven, right?
Yeah.
And but I
Or
think I've read a lot of people that actually that's what they believe.
right.
That's
I've
that's
heard it. I've heard it articulated that, like the size of your house,
mhm. Is
in
your
heaven
mansion,
is
right?
gonna, the people that live in these gigantic mansions got
That's right.
that's their bigger reward. Other people will be living small. Who knows where to,
Well, and that's another thing I did again on my laundry list. So I thought I said this, but I'm not sure I said it clearly enough. I could be wrong about all this. We could all
right.
be right. I have
It's
a view on
okay. It's
this.
okay if we're wrong.
I could be wrong. Could be like, you know what? Turns out Greg does have a huge mansion. I'm in the servants' quarters out back, or the outhouse out back. Okay, that's if the Lord says, Jim, that's what you deserve. Yeah, well, you're right, and I was wrong all this time. I was wrong about that. Um, but I look at these scriptures. I don't think it teaches it personal rewards. I think there are Christians who believe that. I don't think that's true. I don't think that's right.
Yeah. And you and I
Um,
have talked about this. The problem, if you really go all in with the idea of rewards, is that um, you end up, your focus of your Christian life is to try to get more rewards for yourself. It all comes back to like this self-centeredness,
that's
which
right.
contradicts the scriptures.
It's making my sin problem worse. It
It
fans the
contradicts
flames.
the
Right.
gospel.
That's right. It's not blessed self-forgetfulness. It's fanning the
Jesus saved us
flames.
from ourselves. He's trying to
Amen.
save us from ourselves. He's not trying to make us more selfish by trying to work for rewards in heaven.
Right.
Um, yeah, I mean, so it just, to me, it doesn't make sense. And I do remember like in the 80s, there was a big emphasis on rewards. And
Maybe that's yeah, where I first heard about it and seen some of this like the Bible study materials talking about that, and so um yeah, so I think that I distinguish like personal versus people and positional rewards. And even the people rewards, and I was ready to say this, Greg, and I didn't. Um, I think the last time I talked about this and I said, Billy Graham might have 20 million people say, I'm in heaven because of you. Right. So those are all people rewards, and God's, that's what you're going to see in there. I don't think I made the point clearly enough that it might be your calling just to reach one person. And God says, I never asked you to reach 20 million people. I wanted him to reach 20 million people for the kingdom, but that's not what I wanted. That's not the work I prepared beforehand for you. Right. Or I just wanted you to take care of one handicapped child. That's what I wanted you to take care of your elderly parents. That was it.
Mm.
So I don't think, and I think I wasn't clear about this yesterday, and I wasn't clear when I talked on Galatians the last time that yes, okay, I do think the personal rewards will be different. The Apostle Paul will have way more personal people rewards will be different. The people Apostle Paul will have way more people rewards than you and I. Okay, fine, but I don't think there'll be a comparative aspect to that. Oh, he's got 100 of units of people rewards, and I've got two. Or I just don't think there's a comparative piece of that. It's not comparison between us Christians like that. It's proportional to what God wanted us to do.
Yeah, I I like that. And I think that yeah, I like what you said. Because there's so many men and women who pastored these tiny churches
That's right.
and but they've been faithful. They faithfully pastored those churches.
That's right.
And
That's most churches,
yeah,
right?
it is most churches.
And
And
yeah,
is
and
are they going to have a less rewards because their church never got over 100 people?
right.
I don't
I
think so.
I guess I called you to minister to those 100 people. That was it. So
Yeah,
anyway,
that's great.
two more quick things.
Yeah.
One was I was ready to talk about. I talked a little bit about that notion of the distinction between justification by grace and sanctification by works versus justification by grace and sanctification by grace, both being by grace. And a way to think about that I thought of this week, and I didn't bring it up in the talk, was to say, what is the it in it is finished? What's
Mm,
the it? And part of it is because next week's speaker is going to talk about that in the Bible study, and so I didn't want to steal his thunder. He's going to talk about the what is it is finished. But when Jesus says it is finished, I think people who believe in the personal rewards, sanctification by works, it's yes, you're saved by grace, you're in heaven by grace, but after that, it's all up to you. And the one like bigger mansions in heaven for people who have better works, right? And one quote I remember that really just struck me when someone said, "Yes, yes, yes, in heaven all cups are filled, but some cups are bigger than others." And that's not a person who thinks they have a small cup. That's a person who's pretty confident, right?
right.
And they're gonna be taken care of just fine. But the question I
That
think the way
sounds
to
like
think about
Peter. That sounds like something.
it's like, hey, we've left everything for you. What's in it for us?
Right,
Right?
right, right.
Like, oh, read Matthew 20. The cups are anyway. I think the cups are all the same. Um, what if they're all the same? Are you still is interested in following Jesus? And if you're not, say, well, who you carrying the rocks for? To quote the other story we talked
Yeah.
about. But what's the it and it is finished? Jesus say, when I say it is finished, I did just enough to get you into heaven. It's finished. I got you salvation and good luck, guys, because the rest is up to you. It's all on your shoulders.
Yeah.
Or is the it like, no, I did it all. I did it all. To, and I did it all to give you 100% of your standing in front of God. It's all because of me. Not I get you the right to appear before God. Now, have at it. You're standing really in front of him to be rewarded or not rewarded is totally based on your performance, right? But I got you there. I got you a seat at the table. I got you up to the throne. I got you in. So when it is finished, is so if that's what it is finished means for me, it just feels so hollow. It's like a ticket to a race. Like, okay, thanks. Now it's up to me. Versus the
Yeah.
gosh,
Plus, it doesn't sound like it's finished.
it's not it's just
It
like it just started, right?
doesn't sound complete.
No, it doesn't sound like it's finished. It sounds like it sounds half finished. It's like half finished, right?
Right.
Um, it's not good news. It's like terrible news. It's
Right. And think about how many, and this is why we do this podcast, because we know there are believers out there, probably some people even listening now that are discouraged
yeah,
and
yeah,
filled with you know, they feel beaten down because they're trying so hard to be good Christians.
That's right. They got the yoke on themselves, right?
Yeah, and that's Jesus came to set us free from that.
That's
He
right.
set us free from slavery, and it is for freedom that Christ has set you free. Galatians 5:1.
Don't be subject again to a yoke of slavery. Don't go back and think, even though you're Christian, you've got to fulfill the law to please God. You cannot please him more than you already have. Not that you already have. He cannot be more pleased with you than he already is, because he's pleased with you because of what Jesus has done. Right.
Amen.
So last thing. Oh, I'm sorry. Go
Okay.
ahead.
No, you go. Go
Well,
ahead.
okay. Last thing. So you see, I did have a little laundry, even for a talk that I thought
That
kind of,
was, yeah, I'm surprised. I thought it's just interesting how our
I
minds
know.
work.
Right.
Like, don't you wish you could have given it? I feel like, man, I wish I could teach it one more time.
That's what I bet. Like the pastors, you like, on one hand, they say, well, I got to preach 3 times on Sunday, but the third one's going to be great, right?
Right.
Because you have a couple practice rounds. So the last thing was that I was really trying to get ready for a question, and it didn't come, and I thought I could bring it up anyway. Um, but but I didn't. It didn't bring it up. And the question I was trying to get ready for is, at the end of that passage, what Jesus talks about the laborers in the vineyard in Matthew 20, and he says all the rewards are equal. And he said, what is it to you if I want to be generous? The last line is, the first shall be last, and the last shall be first. So I was ready for a question to say, what do you think that means? What could that mean? That Jesus has touched on a parable about, Peter, you thought you're really hard, you're the harder work than everybody else, and you're going to get the bigger reward. Everyone gets the same reward. In that, even within the text of that parable, Jesus says, bring out the people who started last, and I will give them their reward first. So he talks about a reordering within the text of the parable itself. And at the end, he says, for the first shall be last, and the last shall be first. Do you have a thought on that? I mean, I'll tell you why I got all ready for it. I had an answer ready. I'll tell you what it is in a second. I don't know if you had a thought first, though, before I do that.
Um, not not really, although you're making me think about it right now. Those who
And
think
I
that
didn't mean to put
those
you on
who
the spot, Greg, because
so here's
I prepped for
no,
this.
that's
So I had
okay.
a,
No, that's okay. So here's my thought is like those who think they're first are really last. But if you understand that you're last, then you'll be first. And
you're
so
closer.
yeah, you're closer to God. And it's almost like it's our view of ourselves that we think too highly of ourselves than we ought to think.
Yeah,
If we had an accurate view of ourselves, we would say, "Man, I don't deserve to be first. Put me in like I'm the last." And then God's like, "No, come on up here. You're first in line."
that's exactly it. And actually, you articulated it better than I would have at the time. And it's like when the way you just described it made me think of that other parable where Jesus says, "Don't go into the banquet, take the seat of honor, take the lower seat.
Yeah, and then
Don't
yeah, wait till yeah,
right. Don't overestimate your importance.
yeah,
Take the lower seat." So the way I was ready to think about someone's asked that question, and I thought the reason, and I was with what I was trying to do to get ready for that was tell that story I told about Paul running to the end of the line.
mm,
So if you didn't listen to the thing yet, if you haven't heard that, I told a quick story about how, like, if picture yourself in the waiting room to go to the Bema Seat of Christ, the angel comes out with a clipboard just to make it more of a word picture, and the angel has everybody line up, and he says, "I want you to line up with the most righteous, the best Christians right here at the front of the line. You're going to go first because judging you is quick and easy. We'll get you out of the way. And then the worst Christians among you guys go to the back of the line. We'll deal with you later because we've got a lot of people to get through." And then in the word picture I was painting, I said, then you see someone running to the back of the line. And of course, it's the Apostle Paul because he called himself the chief of sinners.
yes,
Right. And so someone said, later at the Q&A at the end, what is the last first to the last? I said, think about that line we just talked about, that whole lineup, and reverse it. That's the
yeah,
first, last, first. right?
Yeah.
And
You think about it,
you nailed it, Greg. You said exactly the same thing. What's your perception of yourself? You're thinking of yourself more highly than you ought. You people
right?
have, you people who think you're 9.9s, you're like the rich young ruler, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and then that makes me think of that where the disciples are arguing who's going to be the greatest.
Yes,
They're putting themselves at the front of the line.
they are.
They're
Exactly.
putting
Exactly.
themselves at the
Exactly.
front of the
Exactly.
line.
Right. They should.
And
Right.
you can see Peter doing that too, like putting himself in the front of the line, learning the hard way. Although after he denied Christ 3 times and then he was restored, maybe he had a more accurate view of himself.
I think so. And I think that may be why Peter, who was, I think it's why Peter put that story in there and wanted that story recorded.
Yeah,
Because people have said that there's really no other eyewitnesses to that other than Peter. So he was the one who said, put this in the record, how I denied Christ 3 times. Because that
right.
was a complete, until then, he was leaning on his own righteousness, right? They may all forsake you, but I will never forsake you.
Mm.
But he had to, from the ground up, like burn it down, rebuild his whole faith on it's all built on you, Jesus, and the righteousness you give me. But yeah, yeah.
So,
When you walk in saying I want to be, one in your rough, when you're thinking about arguing about who's the greatest, you're not putting yourself at the back of the line.
mm. So let's close this podcast with this question to you. What is your biggest takeaway? Because I think sometimes as those of us that prepare, we're the ones who get blessed. Those of us who prepare to teach, we get uh, so much more out of it than maybe even those who we teach. But what would you say is your biggest takeaway in your as you reflect on?
I think the biggest thing theologically for me was this comparison of that I thought these two parables were comparative. They were both in there, juxtaposed the way they were to teach us a lesson. That was the Canaanite woman who realized she was nothing, and she had nothing. She came to him with empty hands, and right then, the rich young ruler, who's the exact opposite, doesn't come with empty hands, and Jesus is trying to get him to zero quickly. That for me, I like that, like bam, big light bulb. I never and before I prepared this, I would and really did the work to study it. I would never have seen that. So that was big. I had long thought that Matthew 20 taught equal rewards. I guess I didn't until this think about how this whole section really was building up to Peter saying, what's in it for me? And that question, well, what if there's nothing in it for you? So that was good too. But this for me, I love those parables. And then, and I think that quote from James Montgomery Boyce really hit me when he was reflecting on Luther's nothingness. And he said, we need to remember what Martin Luther said when he was reflecting on our nothing. He said that our nothing really is nothing and not a little something. And that's what I thought. I still think of myself as at least a one or a two. And like, no, you're really a zero and you're a 10 in his eyes, but you are not bringing any righteousness to this equation. It's all Jesus. And that's when I went a little further on my lower line. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Gospel Addict Podcast. Feel free to contact us via email at gospeladdictpodcast@gmail.com.
Stay tuned for our next episode, and remember, on your worst days, you're never beyond the reach of God's grace, and on your best days, you're never beyond the need of God's grace.
See you next time.